Good morning. I've been really struggling with perfectionism lately, so I decided I would just sit down this morning with my coffee and talk to the camera and see if anything good happened without any plan, except to talk about this thing I've been struggling with. It's been over a month since I've published a video. I've got some footage that I think I'm okay with. I'm gonna start working on today, but I think I've tried like 4 times and just wasn't feeling it, or probably more accurately was feeling bad about it. But this last video, so what I decided to do was just focus on perfectionism, and there's some talk about that was fairly scripted, or at least bullet pointed. But right now I'm just going to talk about my experience and see what happens. So the real medicine for it, I think, actually the etiology of it, the source of it, the source of perfectionism for most of us, I would say, if not all of us, ultimately, is shame. And shame is probably the worst feeling we could feel at all. We all have some of it. Nobody wants to talk about it. If you're familiar at all with Brené Brown's work, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But the simplest way to define shame, I think, is to differentiate it from guilt. Guilt's a really healthy feeling to have. It lets you know when you're off course, when you've done or said something that you didn't want to do or say. You feel guilt, an alarm goes off, and then you can course correct. Shame is different than guilt in that you didn't just do a bad behavior. Shame is that you are bad, that something is inherently wrong with you or broken. You're too much, not enough in some way, and there's 1,000 ways. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's no way to change it. Just by definition, it's a belief that you have about yourself that something's wrong with you, that is incorrectible. So therefore, shame is really often cited as the feeling that drives addiction. Because if there's nothing you can do, if you can't win, the only way to win is to escape. There's nothing you can do about this truth about you. The best way to deal with it is to cope with it. And so we find ways to avoid it. Probably early on with process avoidances, those are just neurochemical things like habits and distractions, media, food, sex, exercise even, ways we distract ourselves from our pain. And then once some of us discover chemicals, those work a lot better or much more effective. So we switch to those or add those in. But for the few brave souls, well, more and more of us today, that choose not to avoid, but to look right at it and question these beliefs that we have whispering from behind the curtain of our unconscious mind.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
We try to get aware of that stuff and see what we can do about it. And that's a good thing. Because here's the thing about shame, it's never true. And it's always some kind of message or some experience that we've gone through in our childhood, something that was said or done to us or something we did or went through. And we took a message from that experience. We internalized some meaning about ourselves through those experiences. And the thing is, none of those things are true, ever. So the thing about shame, it's always a lie. Sure, you could be born without legs and not be able to walk for a minute, but that doesn't mean that you're incapable or powerless. You know, whatever the conditions are. And there are a lot of examples of amazing, great souls who continue to demonstrate that for us all. And so we're talking about self-concept more than tangible, factual, literal circumstances. So how do we correct shame? Well, you know, ultimately we have to really grieve it. Some people will say you have to talk about it in a safe place, and that's how you release your shame. And I think that's probably truly the most helpful way to deal with it, because it can really help us get in touch with how we feel about it and can help us acknowledge our wounds and grieve them and get in touch with what I like to call the great resplendent exhale. And exhale that shit. But once we've exhaled, you know, once we've acknowledged the untruth that we're living with and we have grieved it and we acknowledge the context from which it came, the past experience we went through where we received those messages. Once we've acknowledged that and grieved it, we really have to do another critical step, and that is to tell ourselves the truth. So, and this is where we get into what I like to call personal empathy, communicating with the deepest, most sensitive part of your own heart, or what is often referred to in the field as your inner child self. Probably the best symbol to tune yourself into this feeling part of yourself. So how do you do that? How do you listen to that part of yourself? Well, there's a lot of tools. You can get a picture of yourself. I always suggest people find a picture of themselves from a very early age, sometime before their ego really set in. So like 3, 4, 5, 6. It's different for different ones of us. Some of us don our egos a little earlier than others. You can do this experiment. If you find one of those pictures, it'll be easy for you to feel caring feelings, kind feelings, like love towards the little person that you see in that photo. If you go try and look in the mirror and have a loving relationship with your adult ego state and, all your aged features, you may have a harder time. But if we start with that deeper part of us, we start with from the beginning, we can work our way back out and get some love to it all. So another tool that is helpful here is to get yourself one of these. So this is little Eric for the whole world to meet. This is really dealing with our shame now. I got this little guy in 2010. I was at a heart-centered hypnotherapy training, and it didn't come with the underoos, the Superman underoos. What happened was I was one of 13 students. I was the only male in the class. And so, like a lot of men, I felt like I had to take on some greater responsibility and became the Superman, the hero, the rescuer of the group. And my teacher, my very wise and discerning instructor, noticed this and was very playful with me throughout the entire 6 days, I think. And at the end of the training, she ran out and I was awarded these underoos, which fit my little Eric very nicely. And in that training, there were teddy bears that we would use to have somatic experiences. Like, when you're in a trance state, meeting your inner child, this feels really helpful, really real. But it's really useful. I keep this in my office now and maybe talk to him sometimes, but most of the time when I'm talking to that part of myself, I'm seeing in my mind's eye that child part of me, and probably just putting my hand on my heart and kind of trying to feel how he's feeling, and then meeting that part of me, that more tender part of me, with some adult discernment. So it's really like, I always like to say, patting your head and rubbing your heart. It's a skill. And some of us do that automatically to some degree because maybe we had a parent who was really attentive, caring, encouraged us to feel our feelings, and those feelings with affirmation and discernment. But most of us, I would say, didn't have that because there's this legacy of shame, People who have shame can't help but shame. People who are wounded can't help but be wounding. That's why it's so important for us to do our work. So most of us have some degree of this, and most of us have to learn this skill at some point. And we struggle with it in lots of different ways, but I believe this is the most obvious, clearest, easiest to understand tool, is to go, okay, there's a little person inside of me that's always there. It's got layers covering them up. And what can I do? And when, how can I just focus on that part of me and listen and have a relationship between my adult ego state and this deepest, most sensitive part, this child part? A very concrete, tangible, physical point of projection. I was going to say object, but we don't want to call him an object. We want to make this very personal. So when you sit down to watch Netflix, it's like, would I want this little guy to watch this content? Maybe this isn't the show I want to watch. Maybe I want to watch something that's a little more uplifting. Maybe I want to watch something where I will learn something. Maybe I want to watch something that's better for me before I sleep. Maybe I don't want to watch before I sleep at all. Maybe I'd rather read a book. Would you like for me to read a book to you? Having this around can be very helpful for paying attention to and improving the condition of your relationship with yourself. Your habit, what you eat, what you feed yourself, the content that you absorb, the choices that you make, healthy choices. We always talk to our children about healthy choices. We ought to talk to our children about their choices. And we ought to pay attention to our own choices. So this helps us to be aware of that and practice that. And these underoos kind of help. For me, were helpful to remember what this guy started believing about himself very early on. And then we can learn how to transmute those old defense mechanisms into something more productive for ourselves and the people we love. So let me just bring that all the way back around to shame and perfectionism. One of the things that happened to this little guy, one of the things that he learned about was that whatever he was doing, whether it was sweeping the floor or doing the dishes, and I did sweep a lot of floors and do a lot of dishes, cleaning his room, I would say even navigating around the house had to be perfect, quiet, very quiet, because someone was sleeping that worked night shift. So there was a lot of attention to detail and even probably tracking of other people's emotional experience to keep them calm and to keep him safe. So now, probably when I'm working on creating anything, and there's a couple of books that you guys can check out if this content is resonating with you, and you want to spend more time with me, not on a screen, you can check out Ophelia, Awakening the Gift of Feeling here, link in the description. A lot of perfectionism went into those books. But doing this video thing now has been really bringing the perfectionism full force, like into focus, like never before. I used to do these groups. I think we're gonna start doing them again this spring. But my co-teacher, my co-therapist, would tease me about my perfectionism, and she would say, I know it drives you nuts, but it works out great for me, because there would be a lot of attention to detail. And it was very stressful. And that kind of attention to detail can be paralyzing, actually, especially when you're trying to edit videos of yourself, looking right at yourself, I would say. So again, this is my attempt to just meet that fear head on and just show up authentic and demonstrate perhaps how to meet those fears and release those shames and connect with your heart and speak and come from your heart in a caring way, caring towards the self, caring towards others. I hope this is helpful. I hope you find it helpful. Oh, and if you do find it helpful, please click that little like button, and it will help carry it all over the world to all the other people that would be helped as well. And if you want to see more from me, click the subscribe button, and that'll happen too. And if you know someone that this content might be helpful to, you want to share it. Because really, this thing that we're talking about, this perfectionism, the shame that drives it, the ignorance or ignoring-ance of this part inside of us all is a world problem. And it really is what drives abuse everywhere. Violence everywhere, oppression, tyranny, inconsideration, and perhaps even, a larger lack of foresight and propensity to make selfish choices that have a negative impact on us all. So we really want to be connected to the deepest, most sensitive part of our heart. It's where we're all connected together. It's where we all know how to relate with each other in a good way. And if you want to work on that, you might want to get started by picking yourself up one of these little guys. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be a panda. I've seen a sloth, dragons, somebody had an octopus. I always suggest go to a place where there's stuffies. You can get online, but you'll know it when you see that little person. You'll know them when you see them. It's a real passageway. It's a symbol of a commitment to yourself, and a great thing to have around and share with the people that are close to you. Model that commitment and the willingness to acknowledge that this is an important relationship. So that's it. I hope this imperfect video, we'll see. We'll see if it gets published. I hope that it's helpful. I hope that it helps me work through my perfectionism. Thank you for being a part of my own personal therapy session, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Cheers. Thanks, buddy.